皆さん、見ていただいた通りですね、CNCF のプロジェクトってすごい広大ですと。あと Kubernetes のサーティフィケーションっていうのも、どんどん広がってきていますと。こういった情報をですね、また生に聞いていただけるのもこのイベントのいいところかなと思います。オープンスタックのファンデーションも、立ち上げてからですね、今年で9年目を迎えるという組織になっています。でここでですね、オープンスタックファンデーションのマークがですね、オープンスタックの今をですね、皆さんに直接お届けできればなと思います。マークに関してはですね、僕のベストフレンドでですね、彼はオースティンのテキサスから来ているんですけれども、いつも日本のコミュニティの皆さんと積極的にですね、コミュニケーションを図るというところをすごくモチベーションにしていますんで、見かけたらどんどん話しかけてですねいただければ、彼は日本語もね、マーク You speak Japanese very well, right? ね、日本語もよくうまくしゃべりますんで、コミュニケーションしてもらえばなと思います。それでは登壇いただきましょう。 Please join me with welcoming Openstack Foundation CEO Mark Collier. Come on. Welcome to the stage.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Collier with the Openstack Foundation, and I wanted to talk a little bit about Openstack here in Japan. And Openstack has deep roots in Japan. And this didn't happen by accident. This happened through a philosophy of really welcoming as many people as possible to become part of the community and contribute. And it happened through the hard work of many of the people here in this room, starting at the very beginning. So Openstack, we're having our 9th birthday, and I believe we'll be celebrating it tonight, so hope to see you all there. And if we rewind the clock and think about how we got started, how we planted the seeds 9 years ago that grew such strong roots, that form the connections between all the people in our community. If you go back to the very first summit, so our summits are global events where we come together with the community and think about the next versions of the software. And the very first summit was 9 years ago in Austin, Texas. And in that summit, we had several people from Japan who came and participated. And that was the beginning of really making sure that we were welcoming a whole global community and really getting a lot of engagement and feedback from people throughout Japan. In fact, some of the requirements that were the impetus for OpenStack came from NTT. And when I look at the schedule this week, I see many people from NTT speaking, and it's amazing to see how far it's come in terms of all of that involvement. And that same year, just 4 months later, we left Austin, Texas, and came to Japan to the very first OpenStack meetup here in Japan. Jonathan Bryce, who's here today, now has a beard and, not quite the baby face. He came and spoke, and several of us traveled to Japan. And Kenji, who was with NTT, helped us bring OpenStack to Japan. You can see he has his OpenStack shirt from the very first OpenStack Summit and the launch of OpenStack 9 years ago. And we didn't just stop with the meetup. We really wanted to connect with many people here in Japan on our first trip. So we went to Midokura. I also had more of a baby face back then, I guess. So to be fair to Jonathan. And we went to Midokura, which was one of the very first companies in the startup ecosystem to invest in OpenStack. And Kato-san, who many of you may know, welcomed us and helped us feel right at home here. And we went ahead and explored further the beautiful sites of Tokyo. And Nachi Ueno, who was one of the first people to contribute to OpenStack from Japan, who's now at Google, took us to the old fish market before it moved, sadly. But we were very fortunate to have community members like that. And this is really how we got started in Japan. And the last thing we did before we left town to make sure that we really were getting involved as much as we could before we left was, of course, karaoke and the ancient art of tying your tie around your head, which we learned. And this is Jim Curry, who actually couldn't be here today, was one of the original OpenStack founders. And so once we completed our first trip to Japan and got over a little headache, maybe from the karaoke, we didn't stop there. So over the next 9 years, I looked through all my flight data this weekend and mapped it out and realized that since we started OpenStack, we've flown over 2 million kilometers to spread this message, to plant seeds all over the world, to invite people to be included in the OpenStack mission, to contribute code and ideas, to be part of this journey. And that's what's really created the community that we have today that's very global and very inclusive. So what have we learned after 9 years? Well, the most important takeaway for me is that collaboration without boundaries works. What we mean by this is it doesn't matter what country you live in, what company you work for, you're always welcome at the table. And we've proven that that is one of the best ways that you can produce software is by getting the greatest ideas from the greatest number of people all over the world. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about kind of the evolution of this and how what's been happening the last few years is actually about collaborating without boundaries across communities, across open source communities. A lot of that is reflected here today, this week, with the combination of OpenStack Day and Cloud Native Day. This is a wonderful thing that's being led right here in Japan, and a perfect example of collaborating without boundaries, and it really works. Now, I think we all know that technology is a powerful force for changing our lives. I'm sure we've all experienced this. But more importantly, in my opinion, is that collaboration among individuals is a very powerful force for changing our lives. And these are some of the things that we've learned through the 9-year journey with OpenStack. And if you collaborate around technology, so if you put these two things together, you take the individuals who are welcome to bring their ideas and their code and their documentation, their use cases together with a mission to build technology, to test it, to deploy it, we can really make discoveries and change our world. And this is something that I think we see happening out in the world. And I'll give you one example that to me really stands out. So CERN is in Europe, in Geneva. And this is a perfect example of people coming together across countries to do fundamental physics research. They, a few years ago, discovered the Higgs boson particle, sometimes called the God particle. They don't like that, but a lot of people call it that. And they have really pioneered collaborating without boundaries. These scientists from all over the world, originally it was a group of European scientists, but now includes people from throughout Asia and the Americas. And what they've been doing with the particle accelerator is helping us understand the Big Bang, the fundamental nature of our universe. But they're also doing it with software. So they're a very good example of using this philosophy of collaborating without boundaries. So if you look at their cloud, they run hundreds of Kubernetes clusters on hundreds of thousands of compute cores managed by OpenStack. And if you think about how people are working together across communities right now, including right here in this room, there's no better example of that than people running Kubernetes on OpenStack. It's a fantastic combination. CERN is doing it to process all of this data that comes off of the collider. And these colliders generate more data than you could possibly store. They actually built their own custom ASICs just to filter out the data that comes off the collider sensors, because there's not enough hard drives in the world to store the data. So they're really showing that if you take these different technologies in these different communities and bring them together, you can do something more powerful. And I think that's very inspiring. They also have invested in the Magnum project, which is part of OpenStack, and it's the certified installer for installing Kubernetes on OpenStack. So they're an amazing use case. And if you look outside of science and technology, where people are collaborating without boundaries, this is the Silk Road Ensemble put together by a very famous cello player named Yo-Yo Ma. Have you all heard of Yo-Yo Ma? An incredible musician, very talented. And he brought together musicians from all over the world playing very different instruments that had never been played together on one stage before. And it took them a little while to get used to it, to figure out how they could make music with such different backgrounds from so many countries, with so many different instruments. But when they really got it, they broke new ground in music. And to me, this is the perfect analogy and the type of leadership that we should be embracing in the OpenStack community, as well as open source community overall. You know, bringing people together from all over the world, regardless of which projects they work on, regardless of what countries they're from, regardless of which companies they work for, and saying, how can we do something together that's more powerful? And when it comes to assembling our ensemble in the OpenStack world, we do that at our summits, which happen twice a year, and we have people from 50 or 60 countries come to each summit. And some of you, I'm sure, are aware that in 2015, we had the summit here in Tokyo. And Hasegawa-san, my best friend here, who's been a great leader in this community, he opened up the summit we had in Tokyo in 2015. And in my opinion, Hasegawa-san is really the Yo-Yo Ma of open source. I hope you all can agree. So thank you to Hasegawa-san. We'll give him a quick round of applause. Yeah. And it's his leadership that's bringing together the communities of OpenStack and Kubernetes right here this week. And if you look at all the speakers that we have this morning and the rest of the week, it really shows that leadership. Okay, so we planted a lot of seeds. We traveled 2 million kilometers to invite many, many people to join the open source community around cloud. So how is our forest looking? Well, it's very strong, I'm proud to say. We now have 100,000 members in 187 countries running millions of cores of compute with OpenStack. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is that there are some scientists that now believe that trees can actually communicate with each other through their root network, which is kind of a crazy idea, but I think it's a great analogy for the way that our community works. We now have a very strong set of roots in many countries, starting with Japan, but now in 187 countries. And we communicate through that network, just like these beautiful trees, these redwoods. Now, of course, what we're really trying to do, first and foremost, is write software that's useful. And I'm happy to say that we've had 19, as a community, 19 on-time releases of OpenStack. And right now, the 20th release is being written. And every hour of every day, someone in the world is making a commit of code to OpenStack. So when people are sleeping on one side of the world, there's a set of developers on the other side of the world that just continue to contribute. And the next release is called Train. And the train will arrive in October on time. Terry promised that it would be on time, so we'll see if I can keep my keynote on time. So, you know, one of the things that all this activity has shown us is that OpenStack's one of the top 3 most active open source projects in the world, up there along with the Linux kernel, of course, and Chromium, which is used for the Chrome OS and the Chrome browser. And if you look at the commercial market for OpenStack, analysts have estimated that it's over 600 billion yen a year, or about 6.1 billion US dollars. And that's made possible by a very strong ecosystem. So we have many different companies that are building products and services to make it easier for everyone to use OpenStack, including NEC, as well as Fujitsu, Hitachi, NTT Communications and NTT Technocross. So of course, the many groups in NTT continue to be committed to OpenStack, and we thank them for that. Now, when you look at how OpenStack is used, it's really used for any form of cloud you can think of. Probably best known for private clouds, but if you look at our user survey, it's actually about equal parts of the traditional on-premises cloud, hosted private cloud, where you have a dedicated cloud, but it's in someone else's data center, and public cloud. So this is probably one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is how many public clouds there are that are powered by OpenStack. And if you take another look at the open infrastructure landscape powered by OpenStack, you can see that every industry vertical you can imagine all over the world includes OpenStack. And just to give you a few of the examples, here in Japan, and I think most of these companies are speaking here today, and you should go listen to them and ask them questions, is Yahoo Japan. Cyber Agent is definitely speaking. Line, I know, is speaking. I see some folks with Line shirts on, and that's a obviously hugely popular messaging app. GMO Internet is an example of a public cloud here in Japan. They're talking about how they're using Ironic and Bifrost, which is bare metal management powered by OpenStack. Another thing many people don't realize is that OpenStack has evolved over the years to manage bare metal in addition to virtual machines. And the last company I was going to mention is actually, actually two more, sorry. Rakuten, who you could easily put in the retail and e-commerce side. I've listed them under telecom because, as you may know, they're building a brand new wireless 5G network using OpenStack, and they're talking about this week. And then the last user I want to mention is from Europe. They're called Cloud and Heat. And I listed them in the energy section because they are doing amazing, innovative things with green technology. They're using the excess heat from servers to actually heat buildings in Europe. So these are some of the incredible innovations that are happening when people are building open infrastructure with OpenStack around the world. So fundamental to how we've been able to build such a strong community around the world is what we call the four opens. This is something that was enshrined in the original founding of OpenStack 9 years ago. And there's a lot of talk these days about open source licensing. And of course, open source licensing is important, but it's not sufficient, in our view, to really produce the kind of results that we want to produce. We also believe in open design, open development, and open community. And what that means is when the software is being designed before the code's even written, it's all happening in public. Anyone's ideas are welcome. The development process happens through public repos, and you can follow along with the code reviews and watch all the patches as they get tested. And then open community means anybody from any company in any country can be a leader in this community. So this is a big part of the philosophy that's brought us to where we are today, 9 years later. If you look at the actual evolution of open source in cloud, in the first generation, kind of the early days of OpenStack and the rest of the open source that was available at the time, you really kind of had the hyperscale proprietary clouds, and you had these open source infrastructure as a service software like OpenStack, really focused more on just basically virtual machine provisioning. But this first generation left a lot of unsolved problems, a lot of gaps. So, data locality, IPv6, bare metal I mentioned was something that was not a solved problem at that time within OpenStack, certainly. NFV, edge computing. There was a lot of things that weren't in the first few versions of OpenStack and open source in general that were available at the time. So the good news is that the open source landscape has continued to grow. And so open source communities have delivered on these missing ingredients. So OpenStack itself, as I mentioned, is on the way to its 20th release. The last several releases have had bare metal management, the certified Kubernetes installer called Magnum, et cetera. So OpenStack is ready to integrate with all these other great technologies that weren't around when we started. Kubernetes, obviously incredible, amazing momentum, very successful for application management. And Ceph is very commonly used with OpenStack for storage, and TensorFlow is one of many open source solutions now that are available for machine learning. So to just kind of give you an example of a very common use case these days, a lot of people are interested in machine learning for image recognition, right? Classification, sort of the most common demo you see out there, or actually real-world application for machine learning. So that type of algorithm, that piece of software, oftentimes relies on application management platform, and that platform relies on programmatic infrastructure. So there are a lot of definitions of cloud native. So I guess I can add like another one, but in my mind, the way I think about it is that these tools can now rely on programmatic infrastructure as a solved problem, whether they're running on AWS, Google, Azure, or an OpenStack public or private cloud. So OpenStack really sits at that programmatic infrastructure layer. That's what gives you the cloud that you can be cloud native on. And so to use some real-world examples, you may run TensorFlow on Kubernetes, on OpenStack, and this is a very common use case that we're seeing that's growing. CERN, I mentioned, is doing this. There are many users doing this, and I would encourage you to meet them and talk to them about how they're putting these technologies together. There's still a lot of work to be done, and I think we have to all be committed to collaborating without boundaries in order to realize this vision over the long run. So OpenStack has many services, but this is just a few examples. Ironic for bare metal, that's why it has the little bear. Neutron for networking, and Swift and Cinder are the storage projects. So this next generation cloud is really about being composable and cloud native, giving you the ability to mix and match virtualized compute, storage, and networking with bare metal, container orchestration. So bringing it all together is a challenge, but when you do it and we work together, we can deliver on this future that everybody really wants, and we have people already doing it today. In open infrastructure, when you really commit to using open source all the way down to the bare metal, is, in my mind, the best way. So in conclusion, open collaboration around technology is a powerful force to understand and change our lives in the world, but we have to collaborate without boundaries to do that. And so I would invite all of you to collaborate this week. Start thinking about what seeds you want to plant so that the next 9 years of infrastructure evolution can be open and accessible to anyone in the world. If you're already using OpenStack, please take the user survey by August 21st, openstack.org/survey. This is a really important way that we get feedback and feed it back into the development community. And lastly, if you want to come to our Ensemble and be part of the global summits that we put on, the next one is in Shanghai in November. So it's a little over 2-hour direct flight from here, so it should be very accessible to everyone here, and I would love to have you all there. The early bird pricing ends August 6th, and it's currently quite affordable. It's the least expensive that we've ever had for tickets. It's, I believe, less than 25,000 yen currently. So for a global event that allow us to talk about how we can collaborate across boundaries, the summit is the place to do it. We're coming to Shanghai, and you can also follow me on Twitter at Sparky Collier. Arigatou gozaimasu.